new study by FoodForward SA and the University of Cape Town, it's revealed a sharp rise in food insecurity across South Africa. The research shows that high food prices are now affecting around 16 million people, with female and youth-headed households hit the hardest. The Eastern Cape province has emerged as the epicenter of the crisis. Food Forward South Africa's managing director, Andrew du Plessis, says the 18-month study, based on more than 750 in-person interviews, shows that while buying cheaper food and eating smaller meals is nothing new, the severity of household food insecurity has now deepened dramatically. We speak now to the Fund Development Manager at FoodFoward-SA Mahbobah, Bobbie Jacobs. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Hi, good evening, Sapitso, and thank you for having me on your show. And thank you for allowing us to discuss this incredibly relevant and important issue.
And important it is. I mean, the cost of living in general across the world has, really deepened in terms of the have-nots having even less. But I want to look at the South African picture and these demographics that we're speaking about, particularly women-headed, child-headed households. Paint a picture there of what is going on. What are you learning? What are you gleaning from your study?
So what the study is showing us is that there's been a definite increase in food insecurity. So we're looking at around 17.8 million South Africans who don't know where their next meal is coming from, who are basically going to bed hungry each night. And areas that were already identified as vulnerable, our poorer provinces such as the Eastern Cape, Northwest, Limpopo. We know the problems that are already existing within these vulnerable communities. And with the increases in food prices, the increases in food inflation, in fuel costs, in electricity, it is simply deepening and adding and bringing an added burden to already very stressed situation for young people, for youth-headed households, and for female-headed households in particular.
And what are the push-pull factors here? I'm just trying to understand, particularly with regards to the Eastern Cape. Is it structural failures within government policies, social protections, or food systems itself?
So there are definitely sort of failures at multiple levels, failures within social security systems, failures within health systems, and then certainly within the food system, the accessibility of food, and the amount of food that is still currently going to waste within the food system while we sit with 17.8 million South Africans who don't have access to nutritious food. I mean, this is very hard to justify in our current situation.
And no doubt the inequality is deepening further, as I mentioned. And I'm just wondering, have there been interventions or at least an acknowledgement of how deep the crisis is by the government that is able to ameliorate what these vulnerable communities are going through?
So yes and no. I mean, I think at a sort of higher or strategic level, there is a recognition to increase food security. I think perhaps at a local level, there is failures within the system, and people, I think, within governments or government departments are assuming that the social security grant, social security infrastructure is assisting or working. But at grassroots level, with these communities, with our beneficiary organizations that we are providing food to, we know for a fact that it's not. That within the first 2 weeks and by the middle of the month, the grants have run out and people are living a hand-to-mouth existence. They're struggling to make ends meet. They are skipping meals and they are just doing whatever it is they can to survive and get by until the next monthly payment.
And I'm just wondering, is there a nuanced approach in how to deal with, various districts, various provinces, and just is there enough investment into sustainable solutions?
So I think at this stage, given the quiet crisis that is unfolding, and with the study bringing to bear exactly where the sort of hotspots are, there are certainly different levels of intervention. So within the short to immediate term, we need to alleviate severe food insecurity. People need to donate. They need to donate to the food banks like FoodForward. They need to donate to their local soup kitchens. They need to make sure that there is access to nutritious food and that people who desperately need it can get it. In the medium term, we need to look at the systemic failures. We need to look at, why the social systems, the grant systems, the money that is currently being invested is not meeting the requirements or reaching. And I mean, we hear the stories about corruption, about tenders, there was an article in the Daily Maverick a few months ago about the program that's being run, I believe, in the Eastern Cape. It was sort of, R1 million or something spent on 12 food parcels. I mean, given that we provide meals at 50 cents a meal, I mean, it's unjustifiable waste. And then finally, I think definitely at a kind of policy and legislative level, there are key interventions that government needs to make surplus food within the supply chain available. And we've seen the examples of other countries, Garrett's law in France, the Good Samaritan laws in North America and Europe, that completely ban organic waste from landfill, that completely ban the dumping of surplus food. So that food has to be released, that food has to be donated, and it has to become accessible to vulnerable communities and to people who can't afford food from within the retail supply chain.
Yeah, Mahbobah, I was just thinking of something that completely shocked me, and I'm just being reminded by the statement made by the UN Secretary General saying that there is enough food in the world and there is so much wastage that it's actually unconscionable. I was at a certain retail store and they had a display of food, sandwiches, cakes, etc., delicacies that even though people would buy them, it's not something that people would buy at huge volumes. And the question I was asking was, what happens to the food? And the response was that it gets thrown away. And it's the same with restaurants. Isn't there a way of creating or forcing corporates to not throw away food?
So there are a few ways, and one of it is what we try and do at FoodForward SA as being a registered food bank. We're the only registered food bank in South Africa and the largest food bank in Africa. And we form partnerships with a number of corporates, with a number of supply chain actors within the food system, from farmers, agri-processors, large-scale food manufacturers, and retailers, to try to get them to donate their surplus food to us. So within date, perfectly edible surplus food. And because we have the infrastructure, we are able to distribute it to our network of 2,500 beneficiary organizations. But even with that being available, it's entirely voluntary currently for corporates, for the supply chain to donate to us.
And that's my point. My question is, why are people, because it's criminal. It is absolutely criminal to me to watch people throw a perfectly edible food that has been untouched.
So I think there's several reasons why retailers and people within the food manufacturing sector feel that there are liability risks attached to donating certain kinds of foods. And we've seen the crisis unfolding. We've had it I think it was in Free State, we've had it in Nelspruit, we've had it in the Eastern Cape, outbreaks of listeria, poorly handled food, expired food. So without those kind of safety guarantees, brands and food manufacturers are very reluctant to donate food for fear of the sort of reputational damage of what will happen to their brand if it's turned that they're going to end up being responsible for a child dying or for an outbreak of listeria or poisoning of some kind. And so we have to kind of balance that real risk for the corporate against, a very, very real crisis of access to nutritious food.
And I completely hear you and I understand the concern, but at the end of the day, that food is being sold to us as consumers. So one way or the other, it will be consumed. And, there is that danger. But thank you so much for speaking to us, and I hope we do speak to you again. And there are ways in which we can help donate or, assist your food bank. FoodForward-SA Fund Development Manager Mahbobah, Bobbie Jacobs, speaking to us about the growing crisis of food insecurity here in South Africa.